Last Halloween was probably the craziest night of that year, probably even of my life. The feeling that I could have almost lost my life that night or worse at only 17 years old is definitely one that has shattered my childhood mindset of being invincible. So it was me and my two friends, Dom and Enrique. Halloween was on a Thursday that year, so as soon as we got out of school, we all hopped in my Camry and just cruised around for a bit before hitting the first party we planned to go to that night. Our plan was to basically party hop around the whole night until like 4 a.m. or so. We wouldn't be having school the next day. We spent an hour or so at the first party. This one was more low-key, invite only, at this guy in our grade's mansion. There weren't many girls or drugs there. We hung out with some people we knew, swam, ate some food, and then moved on. We planned to hit up this one party lots of people had been posting the address for on Snapchat, which meant it would definitely be a bit more wild. We wanted to get there before the cops shut it down as well. So we showed up to that one, all drank and smoked some pot, and eventually the neighbors came over to complain about the noise. That was around the time me and Enrique went to look for Dom so we could bail. Turns out he went upstairs with a girl, so me and Enrique decided to just get in the car and look for another party without him. We figured Dom would phone us to pick him up whenever he was ready. Enrique mentioned this one party that was going down in the next town over. I started driving towards the interstate on-ramp to get there, but the road was closed off for some reason, so I ended up having to take a detour through some back roads that ran through a forest along the side of the highway. This road was utterly dead. That is until I rounded the corner to a concerning sight. There was a sedan just parked on the shoulder with its headlights on and all four of its doors open. I slowed as we approached it and rolled by. There were some things on the ground on the other side of the car, but other than that, no one was in sight. "Dude, this is really fucking creepy," Enrique said. I nodded in agreement. My first instinct was just to get the hell out of there, but I felt like I had to see if there was anyone nearby that might be in distress. Enrique agreed with me on that. We're both larger than your average high schoolers, and Enrique had a switchblade on him, so I figured we could handle anything that might go wrong, realistically thinking. I pulled over in front of the sedan and shut off my engine, but left the keys in the ignition. We both stepped out and walked over to the abandoned car. There were a few things scattered to the right of it. There was a skeleton mask, a fake plastic sword, and a phone just lying on the ground. The whole situation was getting creepier by the minute at this point. Just then, we heard a commotion coming from within the woods next to us. It sounded like some kind of scuffle, and we could make out multiple men shouting. Then all was quiet again. Enrique and I both exchanged what the fuck glances. "Should we go in there?" Enrique whispered. I shrugged and whispered that we should just briefly check it out and see if anyone needs help, but that we should leg it at the first sign of trouble. Enrique nodded slowly and started moving through the woods. I followed close behind him. We moved about 20 feet in when the bushes started becoming really thick and it was becoming impossible to move without making noise. Then Enrique stuck out his arm and stopped me. "What?" I whispered. "Shh, shh," he hissed. There was a sound of multiple footsteps on the forest floor and something being dragged through the leaves. It was coming from behind a large bush a few feet away. Enrique and I again exchanged glances. Enrique whispered that we should peek around the side of the bush to see who was over there. I didn't know if I liked the sound of that, but as he crept towards the bush, I moved beside him to see. We exchanged glances one last time, and then he slowly peeked around the bush. Almost instantly, he quickly moved back behind the bush. He whispered that there were 3 guys walking towards us, dragging something. "Let's just get out of here," I said. Then there came another sound, rustling in front of us. We both turned in that direction when suddenly this insanely tall man emerged from the darkness in front of us. This guy had to be at least 6'5", and he was wearing these weird black robes and some kind of pointed hood that covered his face. Enrique, the one with the switchblade, was the first one to turn around and start running back the way we came. I managed to spot more men in pointed hoods emerging from the bushes before I took after him, screaming "Holy shit." We practically dove into the car as I started and took off, going at least 70 down this narrow road until we were in the next town over. From there, I had to pull into a crowded shopping center so we could catch our breath and process what just went down. We phoned the police and explained everything, and then we phoned Dom and explained everything. Dom literally didn't believe us for at least 5 minutes before we convinced him we weren't pranking him. I got on the freeway from the next entrance over and drove back to our city to pick up Dom. By the time we had him in our car and were heading back to my house, the cops called back to say they found nothing. No car or remnants of any kind of a crime scene. The next day, though, was when things really took a turn. It was all over the news and everyone was talking about that some 20-year-old guy got murdered yesterday night on his way home from work. They found his car about 20 miles away from where what me and Enrique saw happened, parked by a bridge. His body was found in the river. He was nude and had a bunch of his fingers and toes cut off. Along with that, they found his skeleton costume left in the car. I instantly called Enrique, and then we called the police. They had me and Enrique both come to the station for questioning, but I don't think they ever found out who those guys were. About a week after all of this went down, my parents showed me one morning that last night the doorbell camera caught some guys pacing around our driveway and walking into our side yard at like 4 in the morning. They were all wearing black outfits with pointed hoods. 2 days later, Enrique said he was watching TV in his room at like midnight, and he heard people moving around his backyard, but when he looked out the window, he couldn't see anyone. We relayed all of this information to the cops, and as far as we know, nothing else ever became of it. It's by far the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. I lived my next 5 months after this happened in constant fear that only got worse at night. I was constantly thinking I was going to end up like that man who was murdered by whoever those people were. In my freshman year of college, I joined a frat during Rush Week, which ended up being disbanded only about a month and a half later. I'm not exactly sure why. I wasn't too big on frats and going to parties, so by the time Halloween rolled around, I still hadn't joined a new one. My roommate Angela had been in a fraternity that a few of her friends were in. I didn't know any of her other friends that were in it, specifically 2 of them she kept mentioning, and I wasn't familiar with the frat itself either. It was not one of the highly ranked ones, but Angela made that sound like it was a good thing and kept calling it underground. She was relentlessly pushing me to go with her to this frat's Halloween party the days leading up to Halloween, so eventually I agreed. The night of the party, 2 of her friends picked us up from our apartment. I didn't talk much to her 2 friends, and it was only a 10-minute ride to the frat house. When we pulled up to it, I immediately took notice how ghetto the whole area was. A few houses on the block looked abandoned, and a lot of them had their lights off. The frat house itself looked nothing like your typical frat house. It was small and dumpy looking, to be honest. Regardless, I still followed my friends to the door. The party itself also looked very unappealing. There were over 70 people packed like sardines in this tiny first floor, and it was hot as hell in there. I noticed there were a lot more guys in there than girls. Most of them were wearing costumes with masks, and the ones that weren't wearing masks looked creepy and gross. I was only about 10 minutes in and not enjoying myself at all. A lot of these guys were also giving me creepy looks. A few of them were like licking their lips and catcalling me. There didn't seem to be anywhere specific where drinks were being served. A lot of guys were just walking up to me and handing me cups of beer. I drank a few of them. It was really cheap beer that was barely making me buzzed. I had a few conversations with some really antisocial guys. 2 of them could barely even speak English. After that, I just sat on a couch having a really shitty time and regretting agreeing to come here. I didn't see Angela anywhere, and I didn't know either of her friends' names, and one of them I probably wouldn't be able to even spot in a crowd. Eventually, a guy approached me in jeans and a clown mask. He sat next to me and took off the mask, and I took a note of how significantly more attractive he seemed than the other guys in here. He introduced himself as Trent, and we made some actually sociable small talk. At some point during our conversation, he handed me a few shots of some hard liquor. I took both of them. The last thing I remember was a few more minutes of conversation with him before I started feeling extremely lightheaded and nauseous. I quickly excused myself from the conversation and began stumbling through the crowds of people trying to find a bathroom. Everything was growing darker and fuzzier. I was thinking that guy must have put something in my drink. The last thing I remember was finally opening the door to a bathroom, and then everything went dark. I could feel a cold, hard floor underneath me, but I still couldn't see anything. I could move my body, however. I realized I was lying on a concrete floor in some pitch black room. I had no idea where I was, and I couldn't hear any noise from the party. As my eyes began adjusting to the dark, I came to the horrifying realization there was a silhouette crouched in the corner of the room facing me. I started moving to get up, but I couldn't feel my legs, only my upper body. Then, all at once, I began to feel really dizzy again. Then I blacked out once more. Next thing I remember, I was on my apartment couch with Angela standing over me. I felt completely exhausted and ended up falling asleep on that couch. The next morning, Angela explained everything. She said that she saw some random guy carrying me unconscious out of the house and into a car. He started driving away with me passed out in the back seat before she could stop him, so she jumped in her car and started tailing him. She said he took me into some old house a few blocks over, and after waiting a few minutes, she came in to find me lying on the floor. Apparently, she was able to safely get me out of there without encountering the guy. She almost called the police, but decided against it as it didn't seem like there was much more they could do. She was also able to assure me that that guy had not done anything with me, as my costume was still on and everything. I spent the next few days tired, pissed, and scared shitless. I felt a lot of anger towards Angela for dragging me to that stupid ghetto party, but in reality I was thankful to have her as a friend. She helped me recover over the next few days. Moral of the story, please just don't drink anything people hand you. It's extremely unwise, and if you're ever somewhere where you feel uncomfortable, just get the hell out. I live alone in a really rural area in New Jersey where houses are spaced very far apart, and the popular demographic is middle-aged men or elderly people. Because of that, Halloween has never really been that much of a thing out here. I'd carve a few jack-o'-lanterns, buy one bowl's worth of candy, and maybe get 6 or 7 trick-or-treaters a night. I'd spend pretty much every Halloween waiting by the door watching movies and eating most of my candy. And at first, Halloween night of 2017 looked like it wasn't going to be much different. I was maybe 3 hours into the night and my doorbell had only rang twice. Another contributing factor to the lack of trick-or-treaters is the fact that my gravel driveway stretches out about 60 yards, and not a lot of people are even aware that there's a house at the end of it. It looks more like a trail. Anyways, at some point past 10 o'clock, I shut off the TV and took the leftover candy to the kitchen. Then I headed to the bedroom. My house is 1 story. As I was getting ready for bed, I started hearing loud noises outside my bedroom window. It sounded like things were being thrown around on my property, and it was coming from the front yard. I threw on a coat and my slippers and ran out the front door. There was no one in sight, but 2 of my jack-o'-lanterns had been smashed all over the driveway. This pissed me off. I started screaming like a madman into the air for whoever was there to get the fuck off my property or I'd fucking shoot them. There was no response, so with that, I went back inside. I figured that was the end of it. But 20 minutes later, as I was watching YouTube videos on my phone in bed, I nearly hit the roof as there was a loud hand slap on my bedroom window. Instantly, I ran over to see if I could catch some punk running away, but all was quiet out there. Once again, I ran to the back door to throw on a coat and my slippers. This time I actually did grab my Remington and head outside. I spent a few minutes scanning the backyard but didn't see anything. As I was peeking towards the side yard, I sensed movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned and there he was. This guy dressed in a horrifying full clown costume, just standing there stiff like a statue near my shed. Despite having a firearm in my hands, I couldn't help but feel my stomach turn. It had to have been one of the scariest things I've ever seen. He was just standing there holding a yellow balloon with his head slightly cocked. His clown suit looked normal for the most part, but the mask was pretty scary. The makeup was all messed up, made to look scarier, and his jaw appeared to be twisted, if that makes any sense. I'd never seen any clown costume like it before. I raised the gun with my shaky hands, and then I shouted as aggressively as I could to get off my property or he'd get a face full of lead. This didn't really seem to faze him in the slightest. I aimed the gun towards the sky and put my finger on the trigger with the intention of firing a warning shot, and that was when shit hit the fan. In a flash, the clown whipped a blade out of his pocket and threw it straight towards me. I missed it by a few inches as I quickly turned to the side, thankfully. It went straight into the side of my house. I regained my composure quickly and turned back towards the clown, but he was gone. I looked around the shed for a few seconds but saw nothing. Then I headed inside, locking the back door. I went around the house and shut all the blinds, and then I phoned the sheriff's department. That guy was genuinely trying to harm me, and he threw that knife with horrifying accuracy. It would have definitely hit me in the chest if I hadn't dodged it. I waited for about 20 minutes in my living room. All the while, at random intervals, I would hear movement all around the house. The clown seemed to be circling it. He pounded at the door for a few minutes and then just walked around banging on all the windows. About 5 minutes before I heard sirens outside, he had gone quiet. I met the officer in my driveway and explained everything. Right away, he started trying to brush it off as some Halloween prank, but I strongly disagreed. I retrieved the knife from the back of my house and showed it to him. It was some type of hunting knife, long and serrated. He took a look around my property, which included the shed. There was no trace of anyone. He left in no less than half an hour. I spent the next 2 nights at my friend's house a few miles away. Despite owning multiple guns, I just didn't feel safe spending the night at my place alone. Luckily, I never saw that clown again, but the feeling of nearly losing my life that night is one I'll definitely never forget.